You don't break because you rest. You break because resting strips you of the lie that kept you standing. You collapse the moment you slow down. Not because you're weak, but because the person you've had to become can only exist under tension. Movement became your disguise, momentum your mask, and when it stops, when the world finally goes quiet, what's left is you, naked, with the thoughts you've spent years running from. It's not laziness, it's not lack of discipline, it's grief, buried under habits that made you look alive, but never let you feel safe. Stillness doesn't feel like peace to someone who survived through performance. It feels like death. Because when you stop, really stop, every silenced memory resurfaces, every voice returns, every shadow reclaims its space. Carl Jung once said, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering." And maybe that's what you've been doing, trading real healing for function. You became what the world needed, reliable, quick, effective. But inside, you're burning. Not from failure, but from the constant effort of pretending you're fine. You built your life like a tightrope walker, always one step from collapse. Not for the thrill, but because the silence beneath you felt more dangerous than any fall. And yet, that's the cruel irony. What you fear isn't rest. It's the confrontation that comes with it. The confrontation with the parts of yourself you've had to abandon just to keep going. Montaigne once wrote, "A man who fears suffering is already suffering from what he fears." Maybe that's you, always on edge, always managing, always afraid that if you stop, everything will unravel, including you. But here's the truth you've avoided. What if your exhaustion isn't the problem, but the symptom of a self you were never meant to carry? What if the real collapse isn't a failure, but a return? The lie is heavy, heavier than rest, and yet you still cling to it, because it's all you've ever known. But maybe, just maybe, the collapse isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning. There's a strange violence in silence, one that most people never talk about. You feel it the moment things finally slow down, when the noise ends, when the notifications stop, when no one needs anything from you, and yet, instead of peace, you feel a kind of panic, a quiet disorientation that spreads through your body like static. Stillness was supposed to soothe you, but instead it unravels you. Because when the external chaos fades, the internal one takes over. The voice that says, you should be doing something. The tension that doesn't let go, even in bed. The fatigue that sleep doesn't cure. The sudden emptiness that appears not when you're overwhelmed, but when you finally have nothing left to fight. This isn't just anxiety. It's a collapse of structure. A psyche that built itself around activity now stands exposed in rest. And in that exposure, something breaks. Psychologists call it the rebound effect, the return of suppressed emotion when the nervous system shifts into stillness. Your sympathetic system, the one wired for action, begins to power down. But underneath it lies a reservoir of unprocessed grief, anger, loneliness, all the things you didn't have time to feel while surviving. You thought rest would heal you, but rest for someone shaped by survival is confrontation. It's being trapped in a room with the self you've been avoiding. No distractions, no performance, just presence. And for a wounded mind, presence feels like suffocation. You sit, you breathe, and suddenly it all resurfaces. The guilt, the shame, the questions, the endless replays of old wounds. You don't know how to be still, because stillness speaks the language of every wound you've silenced. And in that moment, the mind doesn't calm down. It screams. But here's the paradox. That scream is not a sign that you're broken. It's a sign that your system is trying to release what's been held in for far too long, that the collapse you fear is not a malfunction, but a revelation. Stillness isn't killing you. It's just the first time you've heard your own soul without interference. And yes, it's terrifying, but silence, like grief, is honest. And sometimes honesty is the first step toward remembering who you were before tension became your only form of safety. You weren't born like this. You didn't arrive restless, productive, or efficient. You weren't born with clenched fists and a racing heart. That was shaped, sculpted by necessity. By the cold moments where stillness wasn't safe, and calm meant exposure. Somewhere along the way, you stopped being a person and started being a role. The one who handles things, the strong one, the tireless one, the one who never complains, never stops, never falls apart, at least not where anyone can see. But what no one knows is how much that role costs you, what it takes to hold yourself together when everything inside is fragmenting, what it does to a body to live in a permanent state of alertness, to survive so well that everyone thinks you're thriving, while inside you're just trying to breathe. Carl Jung called it the persona, the social mask we wear to survive. And for many, that mask becomes indistinguishable from the self, not because you wanted it to, but because you had to. You learned that being functional was the only way to be safe, that being needed was the only way to feel worthy. But no one asked what it was like to be you underneath it all. And now, even when you're alone, the mask stays on. You clean, you plan, you overthink, you rehearse conversations that will never happen, because if you stop, even for a moment, the mask might crack. And you're not sure what's left underneath. Here's the truth. Your nervous system didn't fail. It adapted, perfectly, to a life where tension was the only reliable structure. To a world where rest was never modeled, only earned, and even then, only in pieces. And now you're exhausted. Not because you're weak, but because you've spent years being more than human, more than flesh and bone, more than what your soul could carry. But what happens when the performance ends, when no one's watching, when even you are tired of the script? That's when the grief sets in. Not just for the moments you missed, but for the self you lost trying to survive. You don't fear failing, you fear slowing down. Because slowing down means the noise fades, and when the noise fades, you hear the truth that no achievement has ever silenced the ache, the truth that you've been moving not to arrive, but to escape. It's easy to confuse progress with healing when you never stop moving, but movement can be its own form of anesthesia, a disguise, a way to avoid the reckoning that waits in the quiet. That feeling, the one you pretend isn't there. The emptiness, the grief, the ghost of something you can't name. You keep telling yourself you'll rest later, after the next goal, after the next deadline, after the next crisis. But later never comes, because you've wired your self-worth to productivity. You don't feel alive unless you're doing something, and yet the more you do, the less of yourself you recognize. You've built a life on forward motion, but you're not climbing toward joy. You're sprinting from your grief. That's the hidden cost. Every time you postpone rest, you're not just delaying recovery, you're delaying reunion with the part of you that was left behind in all the chaos, the part that never needed to prove anything, the part that just wanted to exist without justification. But now you've become a stranger to stillness, and the silence feels like a threat. Because silence reminds you of all the truths you buried in the chase, so you keep running. Not toward the future, but away from the past. Yet no matter how fast you go, you can't outrun a self that was never seen. You can't escape a wound by avoiding it. And eventually, even your pace becomes a prison. A beautiful, efficient, high-functioning cage, where rest is guilt and peace feels like failure. This isn't a discipline issue, it's a grief issue. And until that grief is witnessed, you'll keep mistaking exhaustion for identity and productivity for purpose. But purpose, true purpose, begins when you stop running. Not because you've given up, but because you're ready to come home. There are people who never truly rest, not because they don't want to, but because their body doesn't know how. You sit, you breathe, you try to relax, but underneath the surface, something stays braced, as if the world might collapse again at any moment, as if danger never left. It just went quiet. This isn't your fault. It's your wiring. A nervous system shaped by years of impact, but never taught how to land. You adapted by staying ready, ready to run, ready to fix, ready to endure. And over time, that readiness became your baseline, your normal. But it's not normal to live in constant anticipation of collapse. It's just common among those who've survived what they couldn't process. The body remembers. It holds tension where there was chaos. It holds breath where there was fear. It holds speed where there was no time to grieve. You didn't learn calm, you learned control. And now every attempt at rest feels like freefall, not peace, but vertigo. Like the ground could vanish again, just like it did before. This is what chronic sympathetic activation feels like. The fight-or-flight system locked in on. Not because of present danger, but because of a past that never felt safe enough to be processed. And so you built wings out of panic. You learned to fly through the storms of your life by staying above the feeling. High-functioning, hyper-aware, efficient, but in doing so, you forgot how to walk, how to stand, how to be still without unraveling. This isn't a flaw, it's a wound. And like all wounds, it asks not for punishment, but for recognition. Your body isn't defective, it's loyal. It did what it had to do. It carried you through what no one saw, but now it's asking for something different. Not speed, not strength, but a new kind of safety. One that doesn't come from being in control, but from knowing you don't have to be anymore. Learning to land isn't about stopping the fall. It's about realizing the fall was always trying to bring you home. There is a kind of grief that doesn't arrive with loss. It arrives with safety, not when everything is falling apart, but when, for once, it isn't. You lie down, you breathe slower, the world is quiet, and then, without warning, your chest tightens, your eyes sting, and there it is, and the ache, the sorrow, the memory, the questions. You wonder why now? Why in this rare moment of calm does it hurt more? Because now you're finally safe enough to feel it. Grief is patient. It waits beneath the surface of function. It waits behind the roles you've played and the lives you've carried. It waits for a moment when your system is no longer in crisis. And then it knocks. And when it does, it doesn't ask for permission. It floods. Not because you're weak, but because you're finally honest. This grief doesn't come from what happened yesterday. It's older. It's the accumulation of everything you didn't have time to feel. The heartbreaks you explained away, the betrayals you internalized, the dreams you buried while surviving. It's the memory of a younger you who needed comfort and got silence, who needed space and got expectation, who needed safety and got responsibility. And now that you're no longer running, that child in you finally speaks, but you've forgotten how to listen. Because for so long, listening meant collapsing, meant breaking, meant falling into a place you feared you'd never return from. So instead, you labeled this grief as weakness. You apologized for it. You tried to numb it. You called it regression. But it's not regression. It's remembrance. It's your body processing what your mind couldn't carry. It's your nervous system telling you, now we can heal. Grief in these moments is not the enemy. It's intelligence. It's the wisdom of a self that waited for safety to arrive before it could finally let go. You are not breaking down. You are opening. And yes, it hurts, but it also means something deeper, that the storm is finally passing, that the armor is softening, that the self you silenced is ready to return. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. You keep searching for energy, for clarity, for a spark that will wake you up from this quiet collapse. But maybe what you're looking for isn't energy, it's permission to exist without proving anything. For so long, your worth has been measured by output, by how much you do, by how well you function, by how quickly you respond. Even your moments of rest are haunted by the question, have I earned this? And so you keep going, not because you're inspired, but because you're terrified of stopping. You've confused productivity with purpose, activity with identity, motion with meaning. But what part of you are you afraid will disappear if you're not doing something? There's a voice inside that whispers, "If I'm not useful, I'm nothing." That voice didn't come from nowhere. It was planted, repeated, reinforced by a world that only sees the surface. The job done, the task completed, the mask held firmly in place. And in that world, you learned to perform. Not just for others, but for yourself. You performed stability. You performed motivation. You performed being okay. But inside, something's fraying. You don't need another goal. You need relief. Not temporary, but existential. The kind of relief that comes from knowing you are not a machine, that your value isn't in how well you hide your exhaustion, that you are allowed to exist in quiet, in softness, in pause. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But maybe your why doesn't need to be a mission. Maybe your why is simply this: to reclaim the right to be, without tension, to sit, to breathe, to feel something, anything, without immediately needing to fix it. You don't need a push, you need a homecoming, a place inside yourself where stillness isn't a threat, but a refuge. And that begins the moment you stop asking for permission to rest and start remembering that you were never meant to perform your way into being loved. You've been taught to treat rest like a prize, something you earn after exhaustion, a brief permission slip handed out by guilt, quickly revoked the moment you feel better. But rest was never meant to be a luxury. It was meant to be a rhythm, a return, a way back to the self before the performance. You delay it, postpone it, rationalize it. You tell yourself, "Not yet." But what you're really saying is, "I haven't suffered enough to deserve peace." And so your rest becomes contaminated with anxiety. Instead of stillness, you feel shame. Instead of relief, you feel the itch to get back to doing, to earning. But what if rest isn't the opposite of growth? What if it's the only place where growth actually begins? There's a part of you that only awakens in quiet, a self that doesn't speak in tasks or lists or deadlines, but in breath, in memory, in presence, a self that isn't optimized but remembered. You've treated stillness like failure, but maybe stillness is the only moment you return to who you were before the world made you perform, not the version of you that's competent or needed or praised, but the one that feels, the one that doesn't explain itself, the one that was there long before ambition and anxiety began fighting for space in your nervous system. This isn't about productivity, it's about identity, because every time you postpone rest, you postpone reunion with your body, with your history, with the pieces of your soul that don't survive in speed. You are not a machine with a soul. You are a soul carrying a body that breaks not from weakness, but from being ignored. And to rest, truly rest, is to remember that you were never meant to live only in your utility. You were meant to live in your being, and that being needs stillness to speak. You've mistaken collapse for failure, as if the moment your body lets go, it's proof you've done something wrong. But what if collapse isn't the end of control? It's the beginning of release. You were never taught how to rest, only how to escape through work, distraction, worry. So when rest finally comes, you don't know what to do with it. Your system interprets stillness as shutdown, not surrender, and so you crash. Because for you, there is no middle ground, only tension or collapse. But maybe this collapse isn't a crisis. Maybe it's a lesson your body has been repeating in silence. I can't carry this anymore. Rest for you has always been a kind of vanishing, a dissociation, a fog. But that's not rest. That's residue. Residue from years of identifying with the very tension that's been slowly breaking you. This is the reckoning. You don't need to fix yourself. You need to unlearn the idea that being at peace means becoming someone else. You are not lazy, you are heavy. Heavy with versions of yourself you were never allowed to let fall. Versions you had to hold up so others wouldn't fall apart. Versions that performed instead of felt, that endured instead of lived. But those versions are tired now. And rest, true rest, is not about doing nothing. It's about being with everything without turning it into performance. To rest without breaking is not a technique. It's a remembering, a quiet inner truth that says, you can fall and still remain whole. Let the collapse pass through you. Let it shake what needs to fall, but don't become it. You are the one who observes, the one who remains, the one who, even in the darkest silence, still listens for the sound of their own return. There are parts of you falling apart right now, not because you're losing yourself, but because you're finally shedding what was never yours to carry. You spent years surviving through structure, through tension, through a performance so seamless it looked like strength, but beneath it, something older has been waiting. A voice quieter than fear, a self deeper than the masks. Carl Jung wrote that collapse isn't regression, it's a summons from the unconscious, a signal that what was repressed can no longer remain hidden, that what was abandoned must now be reintegrated, and it begins with stillness. Stillness doesn't destroy you, it disarms you. It dismantles the systems of compensation, the identities built on survival, the layers of you that learn to endure instead of exist. The parts that fall apart were never built for wholeness. They were built for performance, for coping, for earning love in a world that rarely gave it freely. Let them go. Because when the structure collapses, it makes room. And in that space, something ancient returns. Not the child you were, but the soul you've always been. Stillness is not absence, it's presence, not void, but doorway. Montaigne once said, "My life has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened." Maybe your suffering isn't all from what happened, but from what you feared would happen if you ever stopped. But you've stopped now, you're here. And yes, it hurts, but pain is honest. And collapse is not chaos. It's your homecoming. It's the end of pretending, the end of holding your breath. You are not weak for breaking. You are wise for resting. And yes, there is still time to live without holding your breath.